Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to IPI and to today's policy forum, organized in partnership with the Doha Forum, the Stimson Center, and the Global Institute for Strategic Research. This event marks the beginning of a new partnership between IPI and the Doha Forum that will bring recommendations coming from the discussions that take place at the Doha Forum to New York, as well as put forward new ideas to help set the stage ahead of the annual forum that takes place in Doha each year. Today's discussion will focus on the findings and recommendations of the Future of International Cooperation report. This report, published by the Doha Forum, Stimson Center, and the Global Institute for Strategic Research, reflects the outcomes of the discussions at last year's Doha Forum, the Paris Peace Forum, the UN Civil Society Conference in Nairobi, and extensive research by Doha Forum partners. The report also provides recommendations to address some of the most urgent questions of our time, including how we can work collaboratively to harness technology's full potential to the benefit of all humanity. We are grateful to have a group of highly esteemed speakers with us today to discuss this important report. But before turning to our panel, it's my honor to introduce His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Khalifa Al-Nasser, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar, to address us, and following him, Dr. Ahmed Hasna, the President of Hamad bin Khalifa University, who will also give welcoming remarks. I look forward to a dynamic exchange today, and it is now my pleasure to turn over the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Khalifa Al-Nasser. You have the floor, sir.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I'm honored to deliver these welcome remarks on behalf of Her Excellency Ambassador Ali Ahmed bin Saif Al Thani, Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar to the United Nations. We would like to welcome you all to this policy forum on the innovation, imperative, technology, and the future of international cooperation. This event, organized in partnership between the State of Qatar, the International Peace Institute, the Stimson Center, and the Global Institute for Strategic Research, aims to address one of the most pressing challenges of our time. Today's meeting will focus on the findings and recommendations of the Future of International Cooperation Report 2024, a joint effort by the Doha Forum, the Stimson Center, and the Global Institute for Strategic Research. This report addresses a critical question: how can institutions at all levels harness technology's potential for the benefit of all humanity? I extend a special welcome to the representatives of the Doha Forum, whose contributions have been essential to this work. Since its inception in 2000, the Doha Forum, convened under the leadership of His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar, has served as a global platform for dialogue. It brings together leaders from diverse sectors to engage in meaningful discussions on the world's most urgent challenges and to foster action-oriented networks. Under the banner of diplomacy, dialogue, diversity, the forum promotes discussions with a global impact. The report we are presenting today is an example of the forum's far-reaching work, which extends beyond its annual meetings in Doha. It will also help set the stage for the next Doha Forum, taking place on December 7 and 8. The timing of today's meeting is particularly significant. Following the recent adoption of the Pact for the Future by world leaders on September 22, which includes the Global Digital Compact, the State of Qatar played a key role in this process and warmly welcomed its adoption. The Global Digital Compact represents the first comprehensive global framework for digital cooperation and AI governance, underscoring the importance of designing, using, and regulating technology for the benefit of all. This makes today's discussion of the Future of International Cooperation Report 2024 especially timely, as it provides an opportunity to reflect on how the international community can navigate the intersection of technology and global cooperation. Therefore, our objective today is not only to explore how technology can advance sustainable development, but also to examine how we can mitigate its potential negative impacts. This will require robust international cooperation, inclusive governance frameworks, and a commitment to upholding the principles of the United Nations Charter. As the State of Qatar prepares for this year's Doha Forum in December, I am confident that the insights and recommendations from today's discussions will pave the way for constructive dialogue and meaningful action. Let us work together to ensure that technological innovation becomes a force multiplier for a more just, secure, and prosperous world. Thank you again for being here today, and I look forward to engaging and a productive discussion. Thank you all.
Good morning, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me speak that I'm greatly honored and pleasure to speak to you. I do not come from the world of diplomat or geopolitical people, so you will find me speaking about technology from a different perspective. But before sharing a few ideas about technology and how important it is, let me just share with you a little bit of notes about GISR, which is a new establishment. Global Institute for Strategic Research is a key entity that has been just established by Qatar Foundation and the Hamad bin Khalifa University with the goal of looking at the global challenges from the Arab and the Gulf lens. And this is a very important dimension because we would like that region to not always be a receiver of policies and governance of challenges, but being an active member in sitting on the table and trying to tackle global challenges from the perspective of the Arab region and the Gulf. And this is really key to the development of not only the Arab region, but all underdeveloped countries, because it provides a different perspective and a different challenge that it is maybe not the same as the developed world facing with technology or with others. Now, technology is becoming in every part of our life, but there is a very crucial field that this technology gets into. And I think, in my opinion, going to be either going to make it or break it, as they say, which is really the educational sphere. Because we are all, at the end of the day, a result of an educational system. We really learn about a lot of our knowledge, values, manner, while we are really being studying in schools and universities. So that impact technology will have on the education system. Either we will be successful as a humanity and will bring us to more peace, to more prosperity, or it could really increase the divide and increase the problem and increase all the difficulty. As I said, I will not touch base on the security aspect and all those challenges. I'm sure there is a lot of expertise much better than me in this. But on education in particular, let me just share a few thoughts with you. Technology, as it provides a lot of opportunities, it poses a very important question to all educators, which is, what's the purpose of the education now? Because the machine now can generate articles, it can really write stories, it can do art, it do a lot that it used to be considered as the human being capability. So what's education purpose would be? And let me share with you very, very important elements that I believe it is, which is creativity. So I think there should be a lot of focus on schools and universities of boosting the creativity of the human being, which is really the ability of that person to take all those tools and provide something which is really not of an existence. So we need to work all our work around how do we really increase that. Technology will provide us with a lot of means of providing more personalized education. There is no need for anymore that all of us walk the same pathway in universities or in school. It should be really providing us the opportunity of being more competent-based and more interest-based type of an education. So every student could really define its own path by being enabled by that technology, because now technology make a lot of working offline during your leisure time. It can really help you and boost your area of expertise without the need to really follow the same pace that everybody is following. Technology provides also a very important aspect to the education system, which is flexibility. which really provide a very important mean dealing with a lot of the challenges globally about how do you really deal with illiterate people, how you can deal with all those challenges that you really do not have enough building to get all kids into a school building. So flexibility is another element that it is not only from a user perspective, but from your ability to learn on your time, scale in the area you enjoy, and move forward. Last one, which is really a very critical one, is diversity. And this is where unbiased technology become an issue. And today, because a lot of those development happen in the West and it's trained on a lot of West data, it doesn't really take care of a lot of other specific culture type of sensitivity. This is where I think we need to work together in trying to really balance those models, balance those elements so they can cater for different culture, different language, and different setting instead of taking one point of view of dealing with the global challenges. And finally, to conclude, is the soft skills. I think it is very important not to let the technology take away our communication, our meeting, our ability to really communicate as a human and work together toward a common goal. Otherwise, we'll end up being really just aliens to each other, and that will create more problem that it will solve because we're no longer going to be able to have a common language, a common way of trying to find a solution to our critical challenges. Thank you very much for providing me with this opportunity. It's a great honor, and that partnership with IPI and Stimson and the Doha Forum is very strategic for us, and we are committed of working together on a lot of those challenges moving forward. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Brilliant. I can already see we're getting some of the principles and themes developing here for our panel discussion. Before we get to the panel discussion, as Zaid mentioned, we're launching a report, but it's also the beginning of a new partnership for IPI with the Doha Forum. So it is really my extreme pleasure to introduce Mr. Mubarak Al-Kawari, Executive Director of the Doha Forum, which will go over a presentation summarizing some of the report. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen and friends, it's always a pleasure to introduce some key points for this year's Future of International Cooperation report, which is the latest collaboration between Doha Forum and Stimson Center and Global Institute for Strategic Research at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Doha Forum for more than 2 decades has brought together top officials, policymakers, and thought leaders to address most pressing issues of the day under the banner of dialogue, diplomacy, and diversity. The spirit of inclusive dialogue, engagement with both difficult subject and challenging viewpoints, and the orientation towards action has underpinned Doha Forum's growth into the leading platform for dialogue that it is today. Our annual event taking place this year on December 7 and 8 in Doha has been our flagship activity since the beginning. But we are increasingly engaged in year-round activities such today's session. This is the 6th annual report produced in collaboration with the Stimson Center, each examining current global challenges and opportunities facing humanity. In this new report, we return to pressing development and global governance and ask what innovative new institutions and practices are required to keep pace with and to harness the technology's full potential for the benefit of humanity. We focus on how technology and its governance can be advanced and safeguard fundamental global development and security goals, including in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Quest for Sustainable Peace. The report opening chapter presents a fresh analytical lens and foundational principles for effective tech governance, and that assesses both the risks and promise of tech governance innovation for global development, and then shift for focus to tech governance and global peace and security in the domain of AI, cybertech, weapons of mass destructions, and essential mineral supply chain for advanced technologies. And to be elaborated by our colleagues in today's panel discussion, the second chapter introduces, presented on this slide, 4 principles for effective tech governance for development. This followed by 6 distinct global and regional governance innovation, including assembling an independent international scientific panel on AI and Frontier AI Collaborative, and establishing a green tech licensing facility within the Green Climate Fund, and enabling biotech capacity by expanding technical transformation in the forthcoming World Health Organization pandemic agreement. The report then adopts a similar approach in the domain of global peace and security by presenting 5 principles for effective tech governance as shown here, and 6 innovations, including, for example, creating an international artificial intelligence agencies, strengthening a global framework and tech governance collaboration for weapon of mass destruction, and finally launching a global initiative for fair and transparent military mineral practices. This concluding slide relates the report's focus on the innovation imperative to how several of tech governance, global and regional governance innovation introduced can serve the strengthen the action agenda for the 3 successive summits, culminating in the World Social Summit next year in Doha. Like everything we do in Doha Forum, we hope this report helps spur discussions, provides a platform for public discourse, and moves the needle on solutions to critical issues that affect all of us. Thank you again for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you and to meet you in Doha next December.
Okay, we've already gotten off to a really great start, and it's just going to get better from here. So we have with us a great panel to get us into this conversation. We have with us Renata Dwan, Senior Advisor, Office of the UN Secretary General's Tech Envoy; Ashutosh Chadha, Senior Director, United Nations Affairs and International Organizations, Microsoft; Nudara Yusuf, Executive Coordinator of the Global Governance Innovation Network; Carla Montese, Director, Green Deal, Directorate General for International Partnerships of the European Commission; and Richard Ponzio, Director, Global Governance, Justice and Security Programs, Stimson Center. I mentioned that this is kind of marks the beginning of a partnership with the Doha Forum, I should say. Stimson is an old partner, an old friend, and we're just really thrilled to have Richard back at IPI. So we're gonna try to do 2 rounds of questions for our panel before hopefully we'll have some time for questions from the audience. And I'm going to start with you, Renata. Congratulations, by the way. It's the Tech Envoy, part of the Tech Envoy's office. Incredible achievement this week. We've just witnessed the convening of the Summit of the Future, the Pact for the Future, and the annexed Global Digital Compact, which I think everyone recognizes is really quite a landmark. So we wanted to ask you, how can the compact best be employed now to set into motion significant improvements in AI governance? And And what are some of the pivotal recommendations you'd like to point to that focus on the role of technology in the future of international cooperation?
Great, a short question for 3 minutes. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you to the organizers. And really, many of you in the room, I see faces who are familiar, have contributed to the Global Digital Compact. So I think it is our compact, and it will only go forward with our efforts. I do want to flag one aspect, and I think our opening remarks really touched on it. It is a comprehensive framework. And at the heart of the idea of the Global Digital Compact is the proposition that we cannot go forward on a fair and equitable digital future for everyone if we are not looking at the range of issues that apply. So because AI governance is currently in vogue and very sexy, and everybody wants to talk about AI governance, there's a sort of all that old stuff about access of 2.6 billion people, or digital literacy, or there's something there about infrastructure. I really want to echo that the value, as I see it, one of the core values of the Global Digital Compact is its holistic approach. We cannot have equitable, inclusive, safe, human rights-centered governance of artificial intelligence if we're not thinking about connectivity, if we are not thinking about literacy and education, and if we are not thinking about the infrastructure. And indeed, some of the discussions we've had this week have really thrown back the emphasis on AI. Brings us back to the energy question. It brings us back to the electricity question, the sustainability question. So I did just want to say that even as we hone in on some of the recommendations, let's think about that holistic approach, without which we are not going to achieve the goals of an inclusive digital future for all. The second aspect I did just want to highlight, it is multi-stakeholder. We are proposing in the Global Digital Compact, and indeed across the pact, new ways of multilateralism. And that sees partnerships, not just public-private partnerships with industry and governments at the heart of it, but the role of cities, the role of local governments, the role of civil society, and specifically in digital, the role of the tech community as absolutely critical in going forward. And that's, I think, at the heart of this reboot of multilateralism. Now, specifically on AI governance, I think there's 4 proposals that I would really flag as critical going forward, and where the priorities of the Tech Envoy's office, and I hope the entire membership of the UN, will be as we go forward. The first is trying to ensure that we proceed on AI governance with a common understanding of what are the developments and what are the implications for how we understand benefits and risks. So what we're calling common understanding is the idea of the scientific panel, the idea of an independent scientific panel whose job it is not to reach consensus on every aspect, but to really help us think about articulating in an inclusive way that is open to states that do not necessarily have the scientific capabilities themselves. Where is the science going? What are we thinking? And what do we need to be looking at? The second is a policy dialogue. And that's really trying to address the fact that 118 states are not part of any AI governance discussions right now. Opening up that aperture so that we have used the UN's convening frameworks to have a sustained conversation on what is emerging best practices, what are we learning, where have there been issues that have tested a state's capacity to be able to address, and where are there opportunities to learn and exchange going forward. That will be a critical step. Those 2 elements, the panel and the dialogue, will be negotiated, their modalities, by member states, and member states will agree on how they will take forward. So that's an immediate priority, and we have tired the PGA out already, but we will be returning to the PGA and working closely with the PGA and who he decides to appoint as facilitators for that process. Then we come with the idea of capacity development. And where I think the Global Digital Compact arrived at, building on the high-level advisory body on AI, was a sense that we need to start work on capacity already, but there is no top-down approach. Thinking about the cultural needs, thinking about the specificities, and thinking about the fact that we've got very different starting points as societies, regions, and governments, means that we need to think about networks of capacity development. How do we harness what we have in digital transformation agendas, and how do we move forward in partnerships with the private sector and others? And so we're already moving forward to look at that capacity development. And here I think OSET will be working very closely with OECD, with GPI, with regional networks, and with some of the academic networks already in place. And that's a critical step. And the fourth area is, where is the money going to come from? It always comes back to where the means going to come from. Member states have asked the Secretary General to present, as they say, innovative financing options for capacity development for AI. And really, I want to emphasize, this is not just AI capacity building for its own self. It's funding and driving and incentivizing that AI is nudged in the direction of the public interest and in the application of development goals and priorities. So climate solutions, health solutions, agriculture solutions. That fund has been the source of a lot of discussion. Many of you have been part of those negotiations in the GDC. So the Secretary General's task is to say, well, what's out there? And what can we look at? And what might a global fund look like? But in particular, how can it be agile, innovative, and address the real needs of talent, compute, and data capacity building? So I'll stop here.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I love how you started with this point about innovation. The creativity of the new doesn't mean you can forget the fundamentals. And we heard in the beginning of such fundamental importance of education and capacity building you mentioned, which is just such an important part of this. And of course, inclusivity. Again, this theme about inclusivity. We had the Tech Envoy here earlier this week, and we talked a lot about that. And the fundamental nature that this is a multi-stakeholder agenda. Which is perhaps a good segue to my question for Ashutosh Chadha. Ashutosh, Microsoft, we wanted to ask you about public-private partnerships and how can and should public-private partnerships be organized and leveraged to better govern AI along the way. Please.
Thanks very much. And once again, I guess congratulations to all of those of us who were involved in what happened this past week in New York, because that's in our opinion a great leap for all of us to actually achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which, to your point, is actually about making sure that there is democratization of socioeconomic growth across the globe. And to your point, Adam, what do we look at public-private partnerships to help drive governance of AI? I think the report that you talked about, which just got released, really calls out some great risks and opportunities from both perspectives. But if we just get back to the basics of a good public-private partnership, I think so the fundamentals lie on identifying common goals. And I think the common goal that we all need to look at from a governance of AI perspective is to understand that there's great opportunity that AI provides to us, great opportunity to level the playing field, to provide flexibility, to provide an opportunity for everyone, but at the same time, acknowledge the fact that with this opportunity, there are risks that can come with it. And once we all are under that, we have that assumption with us, I think so governance becomes a little easier for each stakeholder in the system to play an important part. And when I call it stakeholders, I look at private sector, I look at the government, I look at non-governmental organizations who possibly represent the civil society. And the trick is for all of us as policy professionals is to find that sweet spot between all these three concentric circles which are intersecting. The private sector, which is at the forefront, and you talked about science and technology, is at the forefront of creating this technology, has the, I think so, the important position over here, not just to talk about the opportunities, but also to bring forth what the risks are. And I think that's something which is very important for us as the private sector, and I as a representative of the private sector, to actually bring forth into these conversations. What can be the pitfalls of this technology being used in what sort of situations? And so it's not just about what the technology should be used for, but what the technology should not be used for. And how should we control it? How should we manage it? Governments on their own end can look at it from a perspective of what should be the regulations, the regulatory interoperability between countries, while securing the sovereignty concerns that each country has. So having the overlay of national sovereignty, but at the same time recognizing the fact that this technology, which thankfully knows no borders and provides opportunities across borders, needs to talk internationally. So how do we make this balance out? And hence, possibly creating frameworks for regulatory sandboxes. Regulatory sandboxes where we take a technology, we leverage how that technology will play out in real situations, and test through a regulatory sandboxes what should be the pulls and pushes that we look at. And the civil society has an important perspective over here to look at it from a consumer perspective, from a small and medium business perspective, which very often gets left out in this conversation. So it's not just about the global south that we're talking about. It's not about the cultural differences that we're talking about. We are also talking about within the global south, large companies, small companies, people in the rural versus the urban. How do we make sure it's not just about everybody having a voice, a seat at the table, but everybody having a voice at the table? And I think that's what the public-private partnership needs to figure out. So the way I would look at it is helping us understand the opportunity, but identifying the risks, which I think this document comes out greatly, identifying the risks, identifying the scope of what that public-private partnership should be doing, and more importantly, what role each player needs to bring to the table. And here I think the great thing, as Renata, you were talking about, is there's so many conversations around governance of AI which are happening around the globe. And it's actually heartening because if you look at previous technologies, when they came out, we actually never had regulations and policy conversations so far in advancing, right? We've had this whole, saying that technology advances faster than policy conversations. This is possibly one of the first times and the best times in history that technology and policy conversations are possibly going hand in hand. And that actually is going to be the rock for a good public-private partnership.
Opportunities, risks, common goals, voice at the table, constructing the table, seat at the table. And this idea of regulatory sandboxes, I really like it. It makes governance seem sort of fun. And so I wanted to segue over to Nudara about this issue. You presented research from the Future of the International Cooperation Report last year on trends on AI governance. And in this year report, you considered technology governance in relationship to development as well, which is so important to these themes of common goals and inclusivity. And could you walk us through a bit how this builds on existing initiatives and also how it relates to the Global Digital Compact as well?
Absolutely. And just, huge congratulations to Renata and team and folks in the room for pulling off the Global Digital Compact and getting 193 member states to agree on something. That's quite a feat. I also just want to shout out there's some of our research associates in the room who helped us with this report. So thank you so much. I see some faces who really helped us with a lot of the mapping that we did for our trends analysis. So as always with our trends analysis, we kind of look at mapping the current governance landscape and sort of what are some of the trends that we see in the space. We tend to find kind of a couple, I would say, false dichotomies in the space. On one dimension, you've got those who think innovation great, open AI, get more out of accelerated progress on AI, let's invest in that. And then those who are like, oh my gosh, AI is an existential threat, right? And then you've got another dimension that kind of looks at the folks who are looking at, as Renata mentioned, digital public infrastructure, human rights, gender-based approaches, so decolonizing AI, property rights, but then also kind of the other pole, I would say, are the folks that are looking more heavily at like green tech, biotech investment and sort of the more risk associated side of the conversation rather than development associated side of the conversation. So you kind of have these two strings pulling at each other in different ways. And one of the things that we do in the Future of International Cooperation report is consider what a governance scenario looks like where we establish a kind of equilibrium, acknowledging the fact that there are existential threats and risks, but also, that there is positive potential for AI and we have to cooperate with the leaving no one behind with the risk management scenario. So, for example, building on the Global Digital Compact, which puts forward the Independent International Scientific Panel on AI, the Future of International Cooperation report considers how, combined with a multi-stakeholder frontier AI collaborative, for which many models, including from Microsoft out there exist, as a sort of community of practice, this scientific panel could actually match the pace of research and knowledge sharing required for AI that maybe we don't necessarily require in sort of an IPCC style model, which, you know, the AI is innovating a lot faster. It also considers how development associated risk, for example, unchecked expansion of digital public infrastructure itself can be harmful to human rights and leave people behind. So the report also expands on UNDP and the Tech Envoy Office's multi-dimensional approach to digital public infrastructure governance, including suggesting that human rights be added to the agenda of the Global DPI Summit happening in Cairo in October. So I'll maybe leave it at that with a couple key thoughts, but happy to come back in for the second round.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So much there already, but I want to just jump real quickly back over to Carla, Director of the Green Deal at the European Commission. You mentioned green tech a bit, Nadara, and so we wanted to ask you, Carla, considering this twin transition imperative to the EU's initiative support both a green and a digital transition in the partner countries that you work with. Could you help us think through what role can digital technologies play in addressing some of the global environmental challenges in promoting sustainable development?
And I joined Renata in saying just in 3 minutes, but you're absolutely right. Green transition and the digital transition are two important pillars of our international partnership with partner countries around the world. We have our strategy called the Global Gateway, that is our strategy, our financial package to support the Green Deal, the digital transition, where we absolutely link these two elements, how we can use digital in the holistic approach that is mentioned in the Global Digital Compact, so looking to the governance and looking also to connectivity at the use of the main challenges that we have in front of us, like environment degradation, has climate change, and has the bridging the digital divide that we have in many countries. So two essential pillars of our cooperation. Now, you asked about the role of technologies. We really think that the role of the technology is an essential element in all this. And allow me to take two concrete examples just to be really factual. We have set up Earth observation Copernicus centers in Latin America, in Caribbean, in the Philippines. What we have done, leveraging our European Special Space Program, we have created some center with our partner countries that will provide a wide range of satellite data and the services in the way that the public authorities can, of course, take and using the data to take an informing policy and the decision. And quantity of data that will allow also the public authorities to address some risk that have in different countries, like natural disaster, like forest degradation, like biodiversity loss. So creating connectivity for space, using the data, putting in place data center, that sustainable data center, green data center that will allow the use of data to answering to the climate challenges. Digital connectivity is also an important element in our region. Just let me mention the financing of the Bella connectivity cable that is linking Europe with Latin America, and also there with the diffusion of data that are being used by the university in the north of Africa, in the Mediterranean countries, to allow them to take the appropriate decision. Just yesterday, we have booked the financial package for a new initiative. It's the Central Asia Satellite Connectivity initiative that will allow in the Central Asia to bridging the digital divide by connecting remote areas with underserved region. Also there, connectivity as an essential, so technology as an essential element to reach and the digital challenges and the natural challenges, the green challenges. Now, all this in fully partnership with our partner, but also combining the effort coming from the private and the public sector. So the idea is clearly to work in a Team Europe approach with member states, with their expertise with member states, but also allowing in supporting incentivize, I will say, with some new financial instrument, the private sector to come also in the achievement of this green and digital transition. Stop here.
Yeah. Amazing, great. Thank you for those really concrete examples. So we've been talking in innovation, private-public partnerships, development, environment, human rights. We are at the International Peace Institute, so I did want to actually touch on a bit of peace and security for you, Richard. A wide range of minerals are essential for the production and functioning of many of these advanced technologies that we've been speaking about today. This has environmental impacts that need to be managed, but also increasingly security risks. Could you tell us what does the future of international cooperation support say about the oftentimes conflict-affected states where these minerals are found, and the degree to which extracting the critical natural resources from these countries can have counter security effects?
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, President of International Peace Institute, Al Hussein, for co-hosting and partnering on today's program. But special thanks to the Doha Forum and Global Institute of Strategic Research for a continuation of this report series that we're marking today. Indeed, Adam, Chapter 3 of the report goes into details about peace and security, weapons of mass destruction, AI, cyber, which we talked a lot about, but a special subsection on natural resources, as everyone here knows, so essential for dual use, civilian, of course, but military uses for advanced technologies. And regrettably, it remains a significant source of instability and even conflict. And building on Ms. Montazi's work on the Green New Deal, it even contributes to environmental erosion, as we all know. In particular, limited governance of mineral markets has produced inequities in mineral-rich African and Latin American countries whose citizens often do not reap the benefits of their natural resources and are subject to societal disruptions and human rights violations. Good example, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where 70% of the world's cobalt is being mined. This is unfortunately contributing to internal conflict and illicit resource exploitation on a massive scale. In response, our report, The Future of International Cooperation, calls for the strengthening of legal frameworks and innovating through other incentives too. I'm going to highlight one or two examples to aid the successful implementation of corporate social responsibility for programs to both mitigate any potential societal and environmental effects from foreign investment in resource-rich yet fragile states. This includes the introduction of practices and principles associated with the innovation. Supply chains has gotten a lot of attention because of the pandemic relief, but we've been writing a lot about the notion of responsibility chains in our work over the last few years, which can serve to lessen corruption and better guarantee that a country's natural resources benefit the general public rather than a select few. By strengthening certification programs and law enforcement, including in fragile states, the innovative framework underpinning a responsibility chain seeks to reduce the hazards connected with spoilers, avoiding greenwashing, and encouraging positive behavioral change. Despite its known shortcomings, the Kimberley process on conflict diamonds offers one important set of lessons for carefully developing and implementing efficient responsibility chains, the basic policy of which, of course, is do no harm. One final initiative I'd like to note, highlighted in the report, a global initiative for fair and transparent military mineral practices, or an MMPs initiative, building on something that's quite well known, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And this would promote transparency, environmental protection, and accountability in the management of mineral resources for military purposes. Operating as a specialized agency in that building across the street, with the active engagement, another multi-stakeholder initiative building on Dr. Chadra's remarks, governments, multinational corporations, other stakeholders. The MMP initiative would facilitate the implementation and monitoring of compliance of a global benchmark for transparency and accountability in the military-related mineral sector, thereby operating in essence as a framework for disclosure and multi-stakeholder oversight. Let me stop there.
Great, thank you so much. We've got so much on the table. It's so tempting to comment, but I'm gonna resist because we really want to move forward. So we're gonna go to a second round of questions to the panel. Let's try to make this a lightning round in some ways so that we can get to a couple questions from the audience. Fundamentally, we're talking about international cooperation, the future of international cooperation. So I wanted to come back to you, Carla, to ask a bit about how some international mechanisms are related specifically. If you could give us your views on how you see the role of initiatives like the UNFCCC's Climate Technology Center and network in driving forward the goals of the European Green Deal. Please.
Okay, many thanks. First of all, probably I will mention again what is the European Green Deal, because we talked a lot, but it's the European strategy, the growth strategy of the European Union to achieve climate neutrality for Europe by 2015. So it's the Europe engagement to the Paris Agreement and also to reach the SDGs. Now, in the technology, as we mentioned, it's absolutely very, very important, as we were mentioned before, to achieve our climate objective. And the role of some initiative like the Technology Center is absolutely relevant. I, of course, take this opportunity to look to my notes and to tell of you that the European Union and the member states are the largest funders of the CTCN, the Technology Center. Since its foundation, we have mobilized more than 36 million euro to support the initiative made and launched by the Technical Center. So we are working, it's a very relevant initiative. It's absolutely important. We are working towards some concrete project initiative in different member and partner countries. For example, we have in 7 countries, the Technological Center is giving for technical assistance to a variety of initiatives. Could be pushing climate technologies in conflict-sensitive countries, but also technology to, for example, face the climate-damaging SFC gases in Kenya electricity grid. So a variety of initiatives that are very, very relevant. So it's a Technology Center ready, and we are supporting this center. So it's a global initiative fully supported by us, because we consider that all the work on technology will be essential to face the challenges that we are trying to face. Many thanks.
Wonderful, thank you so much. One theme that's coming out to me, this really is obviously such a holistic agenda, and we're talking about so many different topics. We've touched a bit on human rights, but I want to be sure that we give you the chance, Renata, to elaborate a little bit on that. One of the concerns with AI is algorithmic bias. It has displayed based upon the data that is inserted. And so I know that's a really important inclusivity and human rights is an important principle for the Global Digital Compact, for the Tech Envoy. Could you tell us what do you see as fundamental to ensure that we center human rights in all of our approaches here?
Well, I hesitate to say anything about human rights in front of a former High Commissioner of Human Rights. But I suppose I'll take up the challenge that it is all of our rights, and therefore all voices required in that discussion. You're absolutely right that human rights is one of the foundational principles of the Global Digital Compact. And I feel very strongly that we need to be clear why. First, we cannot address the inequalities and the asymmetries of information, of capital, of income, of benefits, of technology, if we don't look at the foundations for that and how we think about it. And that's a certain element that requires a human rights-based approach to tackle inequalities. The second is, and I think this hasn't come out enough in our discussions, we need citizens all over the world to trust technology if they're going to use it. If citizens don't trust the systems and the frameworks, whether hosted by governments, whether hosted by local networks, whether hosted by private sector, they're not going to use it and they're not going to share them. And then we are not going to have an efficiency problem in the data we collect, in the quality of the data, in the quality of information we have, whether it's for urban planning or whether it's for training large AI models. So Human rights is fundamental to trust, which is in turn fundamental the efficacy of digital technologies and take-ups. And I think it's really important that we reflect on that aspect as well. I also think we should be a little bit humble. Digital technologies, the pace of development and the advancement are raising profound questions for all of our instruments, including our human rights tools and applications. And while the UDHR and the Charter are our North Stars, we need practical help in navigating some of the questions it presents for us. How do we think about addressing and protecting rights in an era of AI-enabled deception? How do we think about liabilities? How do we think about protections? How do we think about investigations? And that requires us to constantly think about updating, engaging, and applying, which is why the Global Digital Compact includes a reference to the OHCHR's Digital Human Rights Advisory Service. And this is something that we as OSEP really look to OHCHR. We need the human rights team all over the world to be able to constantly help us think through what does this mean? What would this application look like? How is this? What is this emerging practice? And that's an advisory service that the Digital Compact invites it to provide to all stakeholders as we think about going forward. So I think this is an ongoing journey that human rights also needs to be part of, and not a static process, but a forward process. And before I finish, let me say that we talk a lot about bias, and we talk about the challenges of designing AI models if the training data on which it is used, it is not good quality, it is not representative of the solutions we want to find and the voices and the people. But I also think when we think about bias, we also need to think about discrimination across the board. We need to think about how AI is funneling and driving hate speech. We need to think about how it is driving anti-Semitism, anti-Islamism, money fundamental challenges. So I think let's open up the aperture of when we describe the human rights risk. It is about quality of data, it is about bias of data, it is about representation of data, but it also is to address how humans harm each other online and offline. Thank you.
Right there, well done. Former High Commissioner is nodding his head a bit, so I think you did well. I think we're okay. We're gonna jump over now back to Nuthara. We've talked a little bit about managing risk, leveraging opportunity. This is a really important point. Renata mentioned trust. That trust is essential to all this. How does the report handle this fine line between managing risk and leveraging opportunities?
Thanks, Adam. I think what Renata just said is really key there, right? AI doesn't create new things as much as we call it generative. It reinforces what we already have and accelerates it. So if our data collection systems are biased and our data is biased, AI is also biased. So I think kind of going back to your question, Adam, it's helpful to go back to our foundations. What are our core principles for governance and how do these inform our institutional design? So in FIC 24, in Future of International Cooperation 24, we identify 4 core principles for AI governance in development: safety, sustainability, inclusion, and transparency kind of together, and human rights centered and just approaches, which also includes setting out a framework for decolonizing AI governance, as well as thinking about how the 4 A's from the right to education, availability, accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability apply to technology governance. So what are some of the existing frameworks out there that we can use where these sort of associations have been difficult? Specifically on decolonizing AI governance, we put forward 5 key important steps to think about. Firstly, it has to be multidimensional. Different stakeholders have to be in the room. Secondly, it has to rigorously analyze harms, keeping in mind that both harms and rights are not static. They evolve over time, so have to continue to be mapped. Thirdly, it has to really interrogate who absorbs those harms, especially with regards to future generations. Thirdly, it has to be grounded in the rights of minorities. When our current systems tend to have, data is the rights of majorities is mostly reflected, we have to look at sort of the groups that are not present in the data. We think about grounding our rights. It also has to be emergent as a compass and not just a checkbox that we come back to when we talk about digital governance. So I think the key to your question, Adam, is what we need to do is put the risk managers and the opportunity seekers in the same room so that across the report, we reflect quite heavily a multi-dimensional approach to AI governance. We think you can't just have, the policy wonks that are thinking about it from one point of view, having a conversation, and then going to those at the frontiers. It really needs to happen hand in hand.
Great, thank you so much. With that, then maybe I'm going to jump back over to the private sector. We want the risk managers and the opportunity seekers in the same room. That includes the private sector. We're talking fundamentally about inclusivity when we're talking about human rights. That is also obviously central to the SDGs. This is something that is a big theme in the Global Digital Compact as well. And so we wanted to ask you really if you could give us your perspective on what role do you see for the private sector in this sphere to ensure that we leave no one behind in accelerating the SDGs, please.
Thanks. Sometimes I wonder whether we are creating the problems that we want to solve ourselves, right? But anyway, that's like, I mean, you go back millenniums and we created all those problems which we're still trying to solve. But I think it's all a fundamental, it boils down to one word, which is all-encompassing inclusion, right? And I'd like to take a leaf out of an example which our Vice Chair, Brad Smith, keeps giving. He said that even after so many years of having created electricity, lighting up one building in New York, as of now, we still have nearly a third of the population of the world which doesn't have access to electricity, right? And I think so the trick in this technology or in any technology should be not just how fast can you create the technology, but how fast can you diffuse and deploy it. And that comes to a point that Nadira was mentioning, which I would like sort of overlay on this, which is the availability, access, applicability, and affordability of this technology. How do we address these 4 A's as far as this technology is concerned? And when we sort of look at that, we look at the tech stack today. And the stack today consists of the data centers that you have. It talks about connectivity that everybody needs to have. It talks about then the skilling and the capacity that you need to build in people, and on top of that, then the solutions. Now, the private sector, I think, across this entire tech stack has a very important role. Not to say that the government and the civil society don't have a role. They do also have a role. But as the private sector, I think so, it's incumbent upon the private sectors to start identifying where and how we build these data centers in a manner that everybody gets access to it. And we build them in a sustainable and a much more greener manner. We know it's going to use electricity, we know it's going to use land, we know it's going to use water, but then can we create it in a much more sustainable manner? The second piece is, how can we make sure connectivity is enabled? So as Microsoft, for example, we have a goal to ensure a certain number of people by a certain year. Every year we work towards that through our airband program to get connectivity access. The third piece becomes the skilling and the capacity. And here I'd like to make a sidebar. It's not just about the citizens and the small businesses who need this capacity development. It's also a lot of the policymakers need to have this capacity development to understand what this technology can do. Because once you understand what the technology can do, you can actually make better policies to help see how this can get deployed. So private sector will have has a great opportunity, and a lot of us are doing a lot of work in that space, in collaboration with governments across the world, in collaboration with organizations like the ITU, IOE, etc., to actually spread the capabilities to use this technology. And then the top layer is all about the solutions. How can we make sure that when we create these solutions, we don't create, one is we don't create it by using data deserts. We make sure that we include all types of data when we build these solutions. So whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's different cultural scenarios that we take into the picture. It's not just about the West, it's about the North, it's about the South, it's about the East, it's about everyone's data coming into the picture to be analyzed and leveraged. And the other last piece that I would look at it in this thing is that when you create those solutions, how do you make sure that your policies, and these are private sector policies, don't lock in people when they use those solutions? It's important to encourage competitiveness. It's important to encourage cross-pollination and the ability of organizations who build on top of our technology to move from one to the other. Because no one company can build a solution for the entire globe. There are going to be local nuances which we need to take into, which our partners will build in, and those partners need to have the confidence that if they build on our technology, they're not tied down to just one technology, they can actually move to another. They can actually have the ability to go and use that solution in another geography. And the last piece which you brought out, Renata, we need to wrap this around with trust. We need to build the confidence that your data is your data. Your data is going to be private, it's going to be secure, and more importantly, all of us are working together to ensure that you're safe, you have a safe, secure, and responsible cyberspace to operate in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We've got I've got one more question for Richard. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I just want to take a quick poll. Are there urgent questions in the audience that want? I have one very important question in the front. So what I'm going to do, Richard, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a little audible. I'm going to go to the floor and take one or two questions, and then I'm going to come back and ask you your final question, and you're going to have sort of the opportunity to kind of wrap it up with your final question. So the first, Renata, don't get nervous. We have a question here from Zaid Al-Hussein, former president of IPI, former High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we do have to use the podium because we've got communication scramblers in the neighborhood, so we can't have our roaming mics. Zaid, please.
No, I was only allowed to do the welcome and not given the opportunity to speak. So please forgive me for raising this question. First of all, amazing panel and an amazing report, and everyone needs to be commended for this work. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. There is something, though, that worries me a little bit. IPI is very involved in the pandemic negotiations taking place now in Geneva. And the main dividing line is this issue of access to data, and then benefit sharing. And it comes from the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's now very firmly in health. And the issue is this. Many of the African countries are saying, you know, you ask us to access our data, and we want to make it available. We want to make it available quickly so that it's out there, so that it could be of benefit to the entire world. But at the same time, we want to see benefits accrue from giving you that access. If you want perfect data sets, if you want to clean up our data in the Bureau of Statistics, all of it's good. But it goes to the point that you were saying, Ashutosh, that you know, you have to have trust. At the moment, we don't have trust from the global south to the global north, because the feeling is you're saying leverage, and you're saying that there has to be an inclusion of this enormous community around the world that's still not digitized, if you will. But they're saying, fine, and when you make money, huge money out of this, you know, send something back to us. And is that something that we also need to think about when it comes to the digital world of the future? Sorry for taking so long.
Excellent question. If there's one more question I could take from the floor. Okay, so if we go, oh yes, sure, please, one here. Yeah, please come up to the podium and please introduce yourself. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back to the panel for anyone who wants to intervene on the questions. And then Richard, you're going to have the final word. Yes, please, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Well, usually we take the floor from the floor, but pleased to be with you, Jérôme Bellion-Jourdan. I'm a former diplomat of the European Union. I had the privilege to work when Zaid was High Commissioner. I see most of the issues that you've discussed through the lenses of the guiding principles on business human rights, which is an extremely valuable tool, human rights due diligence as a way to approach all the new technologies. Many thanks to the panelists. The question, a lot was said about having a holistic approach, having how to build common ground. I now work for the Institute for Global Negotiation based in Zurich and on an initiative to provide support to chairs, co-chairs, facilitators of negotiation processes. And the question I have, which cannot be resolved here, is how we could also rethink the way we engage in negotiations. And if, you know, there are many ways we could do better, and we saw all the difficulties, I mean, to bring about the pact, and I would like to praise all those involved in making the pact, the digital compact, the declaration possible. But I think there are definitely ways to approach with also the use of new technologies, including artificial intelligence. If it is well used, it could be a way to bring together a wealth of information on different issues, instead of what we often do, which is to negotiate in a silo, sector by sector, to bring all these issues together so that we also, all negotiators have the same level of information as they engage in negotiations. Also in situations where we have so many diverging views, artificial intelligence, and I've used that in simulation exercise, can be a way to bring about options for possible agreement. It's not going to be the final deal, but it can bring options that our human brains collectively then can use as a way forward. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to come back to the panel. I know Carla and Renata have both said that they want to respond to the access and benefit sharing. Ashutosh, do you want to jump in?
I can.
Yep. And then maybe we'll come to Renata and Carla, and if Nadara wants to jump in, and then I'm going to tag on an additional question for Richard before he closes us off.
So you want me to go first?
Yes, please.
All right. So great questions, and I would sort of try to parse both of them together, because I think the point that you raised, High Commissioner, is extremely important, and goes back to what I initially said, which is it's not just having a seat at the table, but a voice at the table. And I think so that's something that we've been missing for a long time. The other piece that's important over here is that we need to do this in partnership, which is why, for example, as organizations, as the private sector who take that data or use that data, it's important that we engage with partners of those regions to actually build those solutions. Because the minute they start doing that, the first beneficiary, hopefully, would be that geography from where you're collecting that data or you're using that data. And I think that's a point which often enough we haven't looked at. We've looked at creating what you would call these Chinese walls or digital walls, where we take the data or we take the information, we use it, and we build our own solutions. I think the key to this thing is, how do we have these conversations in those geographies, and how do we have conversations along with the local champions? And that's critical, building those local champions. To the question which was posed later, I think it's very similar to the fact that how do we make sure that we just don't have these conversations, and Renata and I were discussing this, just in one part of the world. I think it's important that these conversations get recorded, they get enabled in different parts of the world, and there is some sort of a collation of what is being discussed, right? And I'll leave that to Renata to possibly build on that, because I think so GDC did do a lot of that, which was going out and trying to get inputs. Sorry.
Sort of the baton passed.
Yeah, the baton pass. No, it's a great question, Zaid. And I would say that the data governance piece was one of the most difficult parts of the GDC discussions, and potentially the most innovative. There is now a commitment to take forward discussions on data governance that are not just about data privacy and security, critical though that is, not just about potential data exchange and standards, but really looking at the question of where and how do we understand liabilities? Where do we understand at some point monetization and compensation needs to come into that? But it will be difficult. Where I probably would disagree with everything else we always agree with, but it would be just the notion that this can be resolved locally. I think we need a global conversation on what are some of the standards around data sharing, what are some of the principles that underlie it, and what are some of the foundation that can inform local solutions. I think a localized only could get us into a place that is not a happy place for data sharing, data arrangements. And what I would just try to say is, this is something on which companies are very cautious right now, but they have an incentive. Because if people feel that their data is being taken from them freely every time they go and wish their aunt happy birthday online, but is monetization, huge asymmetries of power, that is going to create a consent crisis, and that will in turn create a data crisis. And we're already seeing stuff in the literature around data provenance, data crises. So I think we will see incentivizations around that, but it certainly is going to be really tough. And on the question of diplomacy, I mean, you're absolutely right that AI tools can help. And I would say in particular, widen the consultation frameworks, change the conversation, enable others to come in. But I would say for that, there needs to be two issues. We tried this with Global Digital Compact. We had over 1,000 consultations. We tried using an AI tool to review how much inputs we got in the written inputs. It is important for governments and for representatives governance to join those conversations. It is not just enough about including other voices. There needs to be a listening exercise, and that requires inhuman and in-time conversation. And second, information is not the only reason why people disagree. Information and symmetries, they disagree because they have different positions and views. So while information and an equal level playing field is critical for negotiators, a profound understanding of where people are coming from, that I think AI has ways to go to help us before it can help us. It can't replace human exchange in that way.
Great, thank you so much. The IPI team is going to start getting nervous with me because we're going a little bit over time, but I think this is such a rich conversation. Just want to give Carla a chance and Nudara a chance to chime in briefly, and then I'll go to Richard for final.
Very briefly, just to answer also to what the president writes. Data from South, they have the right to ask for data. And as European Union, we are doing a lot just to finance new data center, green data center to take into account environment, energy impact, and etc. around the world, and in particular with our African partners. Second, it's very essential. I want really to underline what Renata said, the problem of trust. So whatever will happen now with the Global Digital Compact, I think one key element that will be essential to keep forward is the human rights elements. So, for example, will be really very, very important to ensure that the Commissioner for Human Rights will be part of the scientific panel, or will be part, in any case, of all the process that will do the implementation of the Global Digital Compact. The third is absolutely convinced that we need also, whatever we do at the local level, to keep the debate at the international level. So as European Union, we really are joining all the UN agencies working together now for the implementation of the Global Digital Compact, following the guiding principle, trying to put some content on the guiding principle. But I think that will be important to continue create this debate and follow the debate at international level.
I think just very quickly, one of the things that is so important to think about throughout this conversation is the question of power and who makes the decisions about AI and who is affected by those decisions about AI, and to what extent do which stakeholders have agency at what level of the AI conversation. Because I think picking that apart is going to be very important and helpful for understanding where these incentive structures are coming from. And oftentimes it's the asymmetry of power that leads to distrust and mistrust. Specifically on kind of bringing people together and the incentives around data sharing, I would say page 34 to 37 of the Future of International Cooperation report discusses both a green tech licensing facility and enabling biotech transfers, so that there is an actual incentive system between bringing the data from a region and then transferring technology back to the region.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So now, Richard, you're free to respond to any of the questions, but I also wanted to give you the opportunity to say a couple words about the conclusion to the report, which makes an interesting connection to these 3 global summits that we've had, 2 in the last year and 1 coming up next year. The line from the SDG Summit to the Summit of the Future to next year's World Social Summit, and how it connects up with the theme innovation imperative. So please bring us to a
Thank you. And I know you have 2 more events this afternoon, so I'll be brief. And I hope you're not exhausted after the Summit of the Future. There's 1 more summit to go, and it's in Doha, 4th through the 6th of November, the World Social Summit. It was part of the 3 triumvirate of summits put forward by the Our Common Agenda back in 2021. And I definitely want, we're honored that Prince Zayed would share the question, not only on such a timely issue, but it was part of course, as everything was, the Pact for the Future between revision 4 and 5, the penultimate draft. The intellectual property rights action was removed. Extremely important to all this discussion on cyber tech, but biotech, the pandemic treaty, and green tech. And don't forget, the pandemic treaty, it's not enough to just give access to the vaccines. It's the entire superstructure of your health system that makes the vaccine distribution work. So that should be at the heart of those discussions. But I fortunately can weave in a response to Mr. Jerome Bellin Jordan's question by also highlighting in a minute or so the final chapter of the report. And there's an interesting diagram on the back that is at the heart of chapter 4, looking at the 3 summits, how they interrelate. I'll give you 1 macro answer and then 1 example to finish on. The macro point, and there was a lot of confusion. Why are we having the Summit of the Future? But we showed through our series of reports with the Doha Forum and Global Institute of Strategic Research, and it speaks to the art of multilateral diplomacy, which was at the heart of Mr. Bellin's question, that whether it's financial and technical assistance that's reinforcing, most importantly, just generating political will, but even conceptual clarity. It was critical that we got to an understanding, especially this last year, of how the Summit of the Future and the SDG summits reinforce each other on multiple levels, interlocking ways. And the hope and the expectation will be that both of them will now bring momentum into the World Social Summit. And 1 example then to finish on, it was a signature idea from last year's report that we further developed both in the global development and the peace and security space. It was a call from Secretary General Guterres himself, first in the Security Council and in subsequent speeches, about an international artificial intelligence agency. We need to go big. We need to learn from the monumental challenge at the end of the beginning of the Cold War of the nuclear age, and why we created the IAEA in Vienna. And in short, since we don't have time to go into great detail today, but building on everything we're seeing around the Global Digital Compact, of course, capacity building, expanding access for the Global South, but issues of regulation and safety at the heart of the mandate of this new body. And finally, just to note that technology is so pervasive in the 2030 agenda. 25 of the targets across most of the 17 SDGs go into detail, including related to cyber tech. But it is, I'll finish with the Global Digital Compact, objective number 5, harnessing the power of AI and AI governance issues for the benefit of humanity. You heard from Anata and others some of the examples of the steps in the right direction. And we hope that over time, the way to address 118 countries that have no role, no seat at the table on any of the 7 major AI governance platforms that are out there is, of course, to bring this institution across the street into the equation. So thank you once for your time. And please take a copy for a friend on the way out. We hope you'll enjoy the report. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Doha Forum. Thank you, Stimson. Thank you to the panelists. That brings us to the close. Please, thank you so much for coming. It's been a really robust conversation. Thank you.